In a busy spaceport on the edge of the galaxy, an old man named Harold moved slowly through the crowded streets. His steps were heavy, and his cane clicked softly against the hard ground with each step he took. The people around him hurried past, their boots clanking and their voices rising in loud conversations. They were soldiers, traders, pilots, and travelers, all dressed in sleek uniforms or shiny armor. Harold, however, stood out. His tattered coat hung loosely on his thin frame, and his face was lined with age. His hair was gray and messy, and his hands were rough and calloused. But his eyes, his piercing blue eyes, seemed to see everything. Harold didn't pay much attention to the noise around him. He kept his head down, focusing on where he placed his feet. The spaceport was always chaotic, but today it felt even more crowded than usual. Ships roared as they took off into the sky, leaving trails of smoke behind them. Vendors shouted over one another, trying to sell food, tools, or strange gadgets to passers-by. Children ran around, laughing and playing while adults argued over prices or discussed the latest news about wars and trade routes. It was a place full of life, but also full of tension. As Harold walked, he noticed a group of young cadets standing near a supply shop. They wore clean uniforms that looked almost too perfect, like they had never seen real action. Their badges gleamed under the bright lights of the spaceport, and their weapons hung neatly at their sides. One of them pointed at Harold and laughed. "Look at that guy," he said, his voice loud enough for Harold to hear. "What's he even doing here? This isn't a retirement home." The others joined in, chuckling and shaking their heads. "Yeah, look at that cane," another cadet said, mimicking Harold's slow movements. "Bet he can barely walk without it. What's the point of humans like him anymore? We've got mechs and AI now. He's useless." Harold stopped walking for a moment. He turned his head slightly, just enough to glance at the group of cadets. His expression didn't change. He didn't frown or show anger, but his eyes locked onto theirs for a brief second. Then he continued walking, ignoring their laughter. The cadets didn't notice how steady his steps were, or how his grip on the cane tightened ever so slightly. To them, he was just an old man, someone who didn't belong in this fast-paced, high-tech world. Harold eventually made his way to a small bar tucked away in a quieter part of the spaceport. The sign above the door flickered, and the windows were covered in grime. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and spilled drinks. A few patrons sat at the tables, nursing their mugs or quietly talking to one another. The bartender, a middle-aged woman with short brown hair, glanced up as Harold entered. She nodded at him, recognizing him as a regular, and poured him a drink without asking what he wanted. Harold took a seat in the corner, far from the other customers. He set his cane against the table and picked up the glass. The liquid inside was dark and strong, but Harold sipped it slowly, savoring the taste. He wasn't in a hurry. He rarely was these days. As he drank, he listened to the conversations happening around him. Most of them were unimportant, people complaining about bad deals or bragging about their latest missions, but one caught his attention. At a nearby table, two mercenaries were talking. The first was a tall man with broad shoulders and short, black hair. His name was Liam, and he spoke with confidence, gesturing wildly as he described the latest rumors spreading across the galaxy. "Did you hear about that rogue mech?" he asked his companion, a woman with curly red hair named Chloe. "It's been tearing through colonies like they're nothing. Nobody knows who built it or why it's attacking, but it's unstoppable." Chloe frowned, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. "I heard about that," she said. "My sister lives near one of those colonies. I've been trying to contact her, but the comms are down. Do you think anyone can stop it?" Liam shrugged. "Not likely. That thing's got armor thicker than a starship hull. Even the best pilots would have trouble taking it down. Honestly, I don't know why anyone would bother trying. Humans aren't built for fights like that anymore. We've got machines for that." Harold listened silently, his gaze fixed on the table in front of him. He didn't react to their words, but his jaw tightened slightly. Machines. That word again. It seemed everyone relied on them these days. Mechs, drones, AI systems. People thought they were invincible, that they could solve every problem. But Harold knew better. He had lived in a time when humans fought with their own strength, when skill and determination mattered more than any piece of technology. After finishing his drink, Harold stood up and grabbed his cane. He nodded at the bartender, who gave him a small smile in return and started toward the door. As he passed by Liam and Chloe's table, he accidentally bumped into Liam's chair. The mercenary turned around, scowling. "Hey, watch where you're going, old man," he snapped. When Harold didn't respond, Liam added, "What's wrong, too blind to see? Or are you just too weak to move properly?" Harold paused for a moment, meeting Liam's gaze. There was no fear in his eyes, only calmness. Without saying a word, he adjusted his grip on his cane and continued walking. Liam watched him go, shaking his head. "Pathetic," he muttered under his breath. Chloe shot him a disapproving look but said nothing. Outside, the spaceport was still bustling with activity. Harold stepped into the crowd, blending in once more. No one paid him any attention. To them, he was just another face in the sea of people. But if they had known who he really was, if they had known what he was capable of, they might not have been so quick to judge. For now, though, Harold kept his secrets to himself. He had learned long ago that some things were better left unsaid. The bar was quiet, save for the low hum of voices and the occasional clink of glasses. Harold sat alone in his corner, sipping his drink and watching the world go by through the grimy window. Outside, the spaceport buzzed with activity, ships taking off, people rushing to and fro. But inside, the atmosphere was calm, almost peaceful. It was a place where people came to forget their troubles, even if only for a little while. At a nearby table, Liam and Chloe continued their conversation about the rogue Mech. The topic seemed to weigh heavily on both of them, though for different reasons. Liam leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest. "I'm telling you, Chloe, nobody's going to stop that thing," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "It's too big, too strong. Even the military's having trouble with it." Chloe frowned, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "But what about the colonies? What happens to the people living there? Are we just supposed to let them die because we can't figure out how to fight back?" Liam sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know. Maybe they'll evacuate if they haven't already, but honestly, I wouldn't hold my breath. You know how these things go. By the time anyone actually does something, it'll probably be too late." Harold listened to their exchange without saying a word. He didn't need to. He had seen enough destruction in his lifetime to know the truth behind their words. Wars had changed since his day. Bigger weapons, smarter machines, fewer human lives on the line. But the outcomes were often the same. People suffered. People died. And when the dust settled, those left standing were expected to pick up the pieces and move on. As the night wore on, the bar began to empty. Patrons left one by one, some stumbling out into the street, others walking, briskly toward their ships or homes. The bartender wiped down the counter and turned off a few of the flickering lights. Soon, only Harold, Liam, and Chloe remained. Chloe glanced at the clock on the wall and sighed. "We should get going," she said, standing up and stretching. "It's getting late and we've got an early start tomorrow." Liam nodded, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. "Yeah, you're right. Let's hope we don't run into any trouble on the way back to the ship." Harold watched as they gathered their things and headed for the door. Before leaving, Chloe paused and looked back at him. For a moment, their eyes met, and Harold saw something in her gaze. Curiosity, maybe, or perhaps a hint of unease. She quickly looked away and followed Liam outside. Once they were gone, Harold finished the last of his drink and stood up. He picked up his cane and made his way to the door. The cool night air hit him as he stepped outside, carrying with it the faint smell of fuel and smoke. The spaceport was quieter now, most of the crowds having dispersed. Only a few stragglers remained, hurrying to finish their business before heading home. Harold walked slowly, his cane tapping against the ground with each step. He wasn't in a hurry. There was no destination calling him, no urgent task waiting to be completed. He simply wandered, letting his thoughts drift as he moved through the dimly lit streets. As he passed by a row of parked ships, He noticed a group of young cadets loitering nearby. They were the same ones who had mocked him earlier, still laughing and joking among themselves. One of them spotted Harold and nudged the others. "Hey, look who's back," he said, pointing. "It's the old guy with the cane." They all turned to stare, their laughter growing louder. "What's he doing out here so late?" another asked. "Shouldn't he be in bed by now?" Harold ignored them, keeping his eyes forward. He had heard worse insults in his life and knew better than to let such words bother him. Still, he couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. These young people, with their shiny uniforms and fancy gadgets, had... The mech loomed over Harold, its massive frame casting a shadow that swallowed him whole. Plasma cannons charged with an eerie hum, glowing brighter with each passing second. The machine's cold mechanical voice echoed through the spaceport. "Target identified, threat level negligible, elimination imminent." Harold didn't flinch. He stood his ground, gripping his cane tightly in one hand. Around him, the chaos continued. People screamed, ships roared as they tried to escape, and debris rained down from the buildings the mech had already destroyed. But Harold was calm, almost unnervingly so. His eyes were locked onto the machine, studying its movements, its weak points, the way its weight shifted as it prepared to attack. The mech raised one of its enormous arms, the plasma cannon aimed, directly at Harold. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The crowd that had paused to watch held their breath, certain they were about to witness the old man's demise. Even Liam and Chloe, who had taken cover behind a pile of rubble nearby, stared, in disbelief. How could anyone survive what was coming? But Harold wasn't thinking about survival, he was thinking about strategy. As the mech fired, sending a blinding bolt of energy hurtling toward him, Harold stepped aside with surprising speed. The blast missed him by inches, hitting the ground where he had been standing just moments before. The explosion sent shockwaves, rippling through the air, knocking nearby debris into the sky. Liam turned to Chloe, his face pale. Is he actually dodging that thing?" Chloe didn't answer. Her eyes were wide, her mouth slightly open as she watched Harold move. He wasn't running or hiding like everyone else. Instead, he was circling the mech, staying just out of reach of its attacks while closing the distance between them. Each step he took was deliberate, calculated. It was as if he knew exactly what the mech was going to do before it did it. Mech adjusted its aim, targeting Harold again. This time it fired multiple shots in quick succession, trying to overwhelm him. But Harold was ready. He ducked, rolled, and sidestepped with precision, avoiding every blast. The cane in his hand wasn't just a walking stick. It was part of his movement, helping him balance and change direction faster than anyone thought possible for a man his age. Finally, Harold reached the mech's base. Up close, the machine was even more intimidating. Its legs were as thick as tree trunks, and its metal plating gleamed menacingly under the dim light. The mech's sensors focused on him, tracking his every move. It lowered one of its arms, attempting to crush him with a single swipe. The crowd gasped, certain this was the end. But Harold didn't back away. Instead, he planted his feet firmly on the ground and raised his cane. With a flick of his wrist, the cane extended, revealing a hidden blade that glowed with an otherworldly energy. The crowd murmured in awe as Harold swung the weapon, striking the mech's leg with incredible force. Sparks flew as the blade cut through the outer layer of armor, leaving a deep gash. The mech staggered, its systems recalculating the threat level. "Threat level upgraded," the mechanical voice announced. Engaging countermeasures, Harold didn't give it a chance to recover. He moved quickly, darting around the mech's legs and striking again and again. Each blow weakened the machine further, exposing wires and circuits beneath its armored shell. The mech retaliated, swinging, its arms wildly and firing indiscriminately. But Harold was always one step ahead. He used his cane not only as a weapon but also as a shield, deflecting smaller projectiles and using the mech's own momentum against it. Liam and Chloe watched in stunned silence. "What is he doing?" Liam whispered, his voice trembling. "That's impossible. No one can fight like that." Chloe shook her head, still unable to process what she was seeing. "He's not just fighting, he's dismantling it. Look at how he's targeting the joints and weak points. It's like he knows exactly how the mech is built. Indeed, Harold's movements were precise and methodical. Every strike had a purpose, every dodge was planned. He wasn't relying on brute strength alone, he was using skill, experience, and knowledge gained from years of combat. The crowd began to cheer, their fear turning into hope as they realized the old man might actually stand a chance. The mech, sensing the damage being done to its lower half, attempted to retreat, lifting itself higher off the ground to avoid further attacks. But Harold wasn't done yet. He leapt onto a piece of fallen debris, using it as a platform to launch himself upward. With a powerful swing of his cane, he embedded the blade into the mech's knee joint, causing it to buckle. The machine crashed to the ground with a deafening thud, shaking the entire spaceport. For a moment, everything went quiet. The mech lay motionless, its systems struggling to reboot. Harold landed gracefully on the ground, breathing heavily but otherwise unharmed. He glanced at the crowd, then at the mech before tossing his cane aside. It clattered to the ground, the glowing blade fading as the energy dissipated. Without hesitation, Harold approached the fallen mech. He grabbed hold of its damaged leg, and with sheer strength that defied belief began prying open the armor plating. The crowd erupted into cheers, shouting his name and clapping. Even Liam and Chloe couldn't help but join in, their earlier mockery forgotten in the face of what they were witnessing. Inside the mech, wires sparked and fluids leaked as Harold tore through its defenses. The machine's AI core, housed deep within its chest, activated emergency protocols, sealing off access routes and rerouting power to defensive systems. But Harold didn't stop. He worked tirelessly, his hands moving with practiced ease as he dismantled layer after layer of the mech's inner workings. Finally, he reached the core, a pulsating sphere of light surrounded by intricate circuitry. The mech's voice boomed once more, louder and angrier this time. Core breach detected. Self-destruct sequence initiated. Evacuate immediately. The crowd gasped, scrambling to get as far away as possible. But Harold didn't budge. He reached into the core, his fingers brushing against the glowing surface. For a split second, the light dimmed, and the mech's systems faltered. Then, with a final, decisive motion, Harold yanked the core free. The mech shuddered violently, its limbs collapsing as its power source was removed. A low whine filled the air, growing softer and softer until it faded completely. The machine was dead. Harold stood amidst the wreckage, holding the core in one hand. His breathing was heavy, and sweat dripped from his brow, but his expression remained calm. The crowd cheered louder than ever, chanting his name as if he were some kind of hero. And perhaps he was. In that moment, Harold proved that humanity's strength wasn't obsolete. It was timeless. As the dust settled and the reality of what had just happened sank in, Harold dropped the core to the ground. It shattered into pieces, the remnants of the once unstoppable mech, now nothing more than scrap metal. He picked up his cane, which had reverted to its original form, and turned to leave. The crowd parted to let him pass, their eyes filled with admiration and respect. Liam and Chloe approached him cautiously, their earlier arrogance replaced by humility. "We're sorry," Liam said, his voice sincere. "We had no idea, we didn't mean—" Harold stopped and looked at them, his piercing blue eyes softening slightly. "It's all right," he said simply. "Just remember this. Machines are tools. They're powerful, yes, but they don't think. They don't feel. Don't let them make you forget what it means to be human." With that, Harold walked away, disappearing into the after the mech collapsed into a heap of smoking metal. Harold stood in the middle of the wreckage, his chest rising and falling with each deep breath. The crowd around him was still cheering, their voices loud and filled with awe. Some people clapped, others shouted his name, and a few even tried to approach him, eager to thank him or ask questions. But Harold didn't stay to listen. He turned, away from the chaos, stepping over broken pieces of the mech as he made his way toward the edge of the spaceport. Liam and Chloe followed him at a distance, unsure of what to say or do. They had seen things today that they never thought possible, things that challenged everything they believed about strength, technology, and humanity itself. When Harold finally stopped near an empty corner of the spaceport, Liam gathered the courage to speak. "Wait," Liam called out, his voice hesitant. "Please wait a moment." Harold paused but didn't turn around. He rested one hand on his cane, leaning slightly as if catching his breath. Liam exchanged a glance with Chloe before stepping closer. We just wanted to say thank you," Liam continued, his tone softer now. "What you did back there, it was incredible. You saved us all." Chloe nodded quickly, adding, "And we're sorry for what we said earlier. About you being useless, I mean. We were wrong. So wrong." Harold looked at them for a moment, his piercing blue eyes studying their faces. There was no anger in his gaze, only understanding. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm and measured. "You don't need to apologize," he said. "I've heard worse. And besides, you weren't entirely wrong." Liam frowned, confused. "What do you mean? How could we not be wrong? You just took down a mech that everyone thought was unstoppable." Harold chuckled softly, shaking his head. "It's not about me," he explained. "It's about what you said earlier, the idea that humans are obsolete because of machines. That's not true. Machines are tools, no night as quietly as he had arrived. The spaceport was safe once more, but the memory of what he had done would linger for a long, long time." The training began at sunrise, with Harold leading Liam and Chloe through a series of exercises that tested not only their physical strength, but also their focus and determination. At first glance, the tasks seemed simple: running laps, lifting, weights, practicing basic punches and kicks, but there was a purpose behind every movement. Harold watched them closely, correcting their posture, adjusting their stance, and pushing them to go beyond what they thought they could do. "This isn't just about muscle," Harold explained as they took a short break. "It's about control. You need to know your body, how it moves, how far you can push it. Machines don't think, they react. Humans have to be smarter than that." Liam wiped sweat from his forehead, panting heavily. "I didn't realize how hard this would be," he admitted. "I mean, I've trained before, but this is different." Chloe nodded in agreement, her arms trembling slightly from holding a defensive position for too long. "It's like you're teaching us to fight without relying on anything but ourselves," she said. "No weapons, no armor, nothing." Harold smiled faintly. "Exactly. A true warrior doesn't need fancy tools to win. The best weapon you'll ever have is right here." He tapped his temple with one finger, then placed a hand over his heart. "Mind and spirit. Without those, all the tech in the galaxy won't save you." As the days turned into weeks, Liam and Chloe grew stronger, not just physically but mentally as well. They learned to anticipate Harold's movements during sparring sessions, to read his intentions before he acted. He taught them how to use their surroundings to their advantage, how to turn an opponent's strength against them, and most importantly, how to stay calm under pressure. One morning, after a particularly grueling session, Harold led them to a quiet spot near the edge of the spaceport. It was a small clearing surrounded by tall trees, far from the noise and bustle of daily life. Here the air felt cooler, and the sounds of nature provided a soothing backdrop to their lessons. "Today," Harold said, sitting cross-legged on the ground, "we're going to talk about something even more important than fighting techniques. Something that will decide whether you succeed or fail when the time comes." Liam and Chloe exchanged curious glances before sitting down across from him. "What is it?" Chloe asked. "Fear," Harold replied simply. "It's the biggest enemy you'll ever face, not mechs, not other fighters, not even death. Fear will paralyze you if you let it. It'll cloud your judgment, make you second-guess yourself, and leave you vulnerable." Liam frowned, thinking back to the night of the mech attack. "I remember being scared," he admitted. "Terrified, actually. But you weren't. How did you stay so calm?" Harold leaned forward, his expression serious. "Because I've faced fear before, and I've lost to it. That's something everyone has to experience at least once. The trick is learning how to move past it. Fear isn't evil, it's natural, it keeps you alive, but letting it control you? That's where the danger lies. He paused, looking at both of them. Tell me, what are you afraid of? Chloe hesitated, then spoke softly. Failing. Letting people down. What if we're not strong enough to protect them? Liam nodded. Same here. And dying, I guess. Not because I'm scared of what happens afterward, but because I don't want to leave things unfinished. There's still so much I want to do. Harold listened carefully, nodding slowly. Good. Acknowledge your fears, don't run from them. Once you understand what scares you, you can start working through it. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. To illustrate his point, Harold told them a story from his past. Years ago, during my time with the Vanguard, we were sent on a mission to stop a group of rogue soldiers who had taken over a mining colony. They were heavily armed, outnumbered us, and knew the terrain better than we did. We were walking into a trap and everyone knew it, including me. I was terrified, but I also knew that if we didn't act, innocent people would die. What did you do? Chloe asked, leaning forward. We went anyway, Harold said. But not blindly. We planned every step, prepared for every possible outcome. When the fighting started, I focused on one thing: staying alive long enough to complete the mission. Fear was still there. It never goes away. But I didn't let it stop me. In the end, we succeeded, not because we were stronger or smarter, but because we refused to give up. The story left Liam and Chloe deep in thought. They realized that Harold wasn't just teaching them how to fight. He was showing them how to live, how to face challenges, head on, no matter how daunting they seemed. Over the next few days, Harold introduced new elements to their training. He brought them to abandoned buildings and had them practice navigating tight spaces, using shadows to hide, and setting traps for imaginary enemies. He taught them how to conserve energy during long battles and how to recognize weaknesses in an opponent's defense. Each lesson built upon the last, creating a foundation of skills that would serve them well in the future. Word of their training spread quickly, and soon others began showing interest. Some were locals who wanted to learn self-defense, while others were travelers passing through the spaceport. Harold welcomed them all, adapting his methods to suit each person's abilities. Under his guidance, a small community of students formed, united by a shared goal: to become stronger, smarter, and braver versions of themselves. Despite the growing number of followers, Harold remained humble. He never sought recognition or praise, nor did he demand loyalty from his students. Instead, he encouraged them to find their own paths, to use what they learned to help others. Strength means nothing if you don't use it for good, he often reminded them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Harold gathered everyone together for a final lesson. Remember, he said, standing tall despite his age, the greatest battles aren't always fought with fists or weapons. Sometimes they're fought in your mind, in your heart. Stand firm in who you are, and no force in the galaxy will be able to break you. The crowd erupted into applause, cheering for the man who had changed their lives in such a short time. Liam and Chloe stood at the front, smiling proudly. They had come a long way since that fateful night when they mocked an old man with a cane. Now they saw Harold for who he truly was: a teacher, a leader, and a symbol of hope. As the stars began to twinkle above, Harold slipped away unnoticed, leaving his students to celebrate their progress. He didn't need fanfare or gratitude. Seeing the spark of determination in their eyes was reward enough. For Harold, the real victory wasn't defeating machines or earning admiration. It was knowing that he had reignited the flame of human resilience in a world that had almost forgotten it. The days following Harold's final lesson were filled with a sense of purpose for Liam, Chloe, and the rest of their group. The training had transformed them, not just physically, but in the way they carried themselves, the way they thought about problems, and the way they interacted with others. They weren't just stronger fighters, they were more confident people. Word of what Harold had done continued to spread, reaching places far beyond the spaceport. Stories of the old man who defeated a war mech barehanded inspired countless individuals across the galaxy. Journalists arrived in droves, eager to interview anyone who had seen Harold or trained under him. Their questions ranged from simple curiosity, what did he look like, to deeper inquiries about his methods and philosophy. Some reporters even tried to track Harold down, hoping to get an exclusive story. But no matter how hard they searched, Harold was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Liam and Chloe became the unofficial spokespeople for Harold's teachings. Though neither of them felt entirely comfortable in the spotlight, they knew it was important to share what they had learned. "He didn't do all this so we could keep it to ourselves," Chloe told Liam one evening as they prepared for another interview. "If we don't tell people about him, then everything he taught us might be forgotten." Liam nodded, adjusting the collar of his shirt nervously. "I know, it's just weird, you know? Talking about someone who doesn't want any attention feels kind of wrong." Chloe smiled softly. "Then let's focus on the message, not the man. That's what he would have wanted." As they spoke to reporters, they emphasized Harold's core lessons: the importance of balance between human skill and technology, the value of mental strength over physical power, and the idea that true courage comes from facing fear rather than avoiding it. These ideas resonated deeply with audiences, sparking debates and discussions across the galaxy. People began questioning their reliance on machines and wondering if humanity had lost something essential in its pursuit of progress. In response, small groups started forming in various colonies and cities, inspired by Harold's example. They called themselves the Vanguard Legacy, though none of them knew if Harold had ever been part of such a group. Each community adapted his teachings to fit their unique needs, whether it was self-defense training, teamwork exercises, or simply encouraging people to rely less on gadgets and more on their own abilities. What united them all was a shared belief in the enduring strength of the human spirit. Despite the growing movement, Liam and Chloe often found themselves reflecting on Harold's absence. "Do you think we'll ever see him again?" Chloe asked. One night as they sat on the roof of their shared apartment, staring. Months had passed since Harold disappeared from the spaceport, leaving behind only memories and lessons that would shape the future. The movement inspired by his actions, the Vanguard Legacy, continued to grow, spreading across planets and colonies like wildfire. People everywhere embraced the idea of balancing human strength with technology, refusing to let machines define their limits. It was no longer just a story about an old man who defeated a mech. It became a philosophy, a way of life. Liam and Chloe played key roles in nurturing this change. They traveled tirelessly, teaching others what Harold had taught them. Their methods weren't flashy or complicated. They focused on fundamentals: discipline, resilience, and teamwork. But these simple principles resonated deeply with people who felt disconnected from their own potential. Everywhere they went, they saw communities coming together, rediscovering the power of unity and determination. In one colony, a group of farmers used Harold's teachings to protect their crops from raiders who had long terrorized them. Instead of relying on hired mercenaries or expensive security systems, they organized themselves into a cohesive unit. Using makeshift tools as weapons and practicing strategies Liam and Chloe had shared, they successfully drove off the attackers. For the first time in years, the farmers felt safe and proud of what they had achieved. In another city, a young woman named Maya transformed her neighborhood after hearing about the Vanguard Legacy. She gathered local children and taught them basic self-defense techniques, encouraging them to stand up for themselves and each other. Over time, the once dangerous streets became safer, not because of new technology or laws, but because people started believing in their ability to make a difference. These stories reached Liam and Chloe wherever they went, fueling their resolve to keep going. They knew they couldn't be everywhere at once, but they also knew that Harold's message didn't need them to survive. It belonged to everyone who chose to carry it forward. Despite their success, there were moments when both Liam and Chloe wondered if they were doing enough. Late at night, after a long day of training or traveling, they would sit quietly, thinking about Harold. "Do you think we're honoring him the right way?" Chloe asked one evening as they camped under a starry sky. Liam stared into the fire crackling between them, its orange glow reflecting in his eyes. "I don't know. he admitted. But I think he'd understand. He didn't ask for perfection, he just wanted us to try. Chloe nodded, wrapping her arms around her knees. You're right. And look at how far we've come. Look at all the people who are trying because of him. Their thoughts often drifted back to Harold's words. Strength means nothing if you don't use it for good. Those words guided everything they did, reminding them that their mission wasn't just about improving individuals, it was about building a better world. As the months turned into a year, reports of rogue mechs and AI-driven threats continued to surface, but something had changed. Communities were no longer helpless victims waiting for outside forces to save them. They banded together, using Harold's lessons to fight back in ways that surprised even seasoned soldiers. In some cases, entire fleets of advanced warships were called off missions because local militias had already handled the problem. Word of these victories reached military leaders, sparking debates about the role of humans versus machines in warfare. Some argued that reliance on AI and mechs had made society complacent, while others insisted that technology was still the future. Amidst the arguments, however, one thing was clear. Harold's legacy had forced people to reconsider their priorities. Bangam, in the spaceport where it all began, life had returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be. The scars left by the rogue mech's attack were slowly fading, replaced by rebuilt structures and renewed hope. A statue of Harold now stood in the center of the square, erected by grateful citizens. It depicted him standing tall, cane in hand, gazing confidently into the distance. Below it, an inscription read, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." Tourists came from far and wide to see the statue, snapping pictures and sharing stories of how Harold had inspired them. Merchants sold souvenirs bearing his likeness, and children played games pretending to be him. Though Harold himself would likely have laughed at the attention, the symbolism was undeniable. He had become more than a man, he was a beacon of hope in a rapidly changing galaxy. One day, Liam and Chloe returned to the spaceport for the first time since their journey began. They walked through the familiar streets, taking in the changes. The bar where Harold had sat that fateful night was still there, though it had been renovated. New faces filled the crowd, but the spirit of resilience remained. When they reached the statue, they paused, staring up at it in silence. "It feels strange," Liam said finally, "seeing him immortalized like this." Chloe smiled softly. "He deserves it, even if he wouldn't agree." They stayed for a while, watching as families gathered around the statue, pointing and talking. Animatedly, children ran circles around it, laughing and shouting. For a moment, Liam and Chloe felt overwhelmed by the impact one person had made, not just on them, but on countless lives. Before leaving, they placed the wooden carving the boy had given them at the base of the statue. It fit perfectly among the flowers and notes left by visitors. As they walked away, Chloe glanced back one last time. "Do you think he knows?" she asked quietly. Liam shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe. Or maybe he doesn't need to. His work speaks for itself." Far away in a quiet farming colony untouched by the chaos of the galaxy, Harold tended to a small garden. The sun warmed his weathered face as he leaned on his cane, surveying the rows of vegetables and herbs he had planted. Nearby, children played, their laughter echoing through the fields. Occasionally, they would run up to him asking questions or begging him to tell another story. Harold obliged, his voice calm and steady as he spoke of battles fought and lessons learned. He never mentioned his name or boasted of his deeds. To the children, he was simply the old man with the cane, a kind stranger who always seemed to know the answers. Yet every so often, someone would arrive from a distant colony seeking advice or guidance. These visitors recognized Harold immediately, though they rarely said anything aloud. Instead, they thanked him quietly, their gratitude shining in their eyes. Harold accepted their thanks with a nod, then sent them on their way, reminding them that the real heroes were those carrying his message forward. He didn't need statues or fame. He found joy in knowing that his legacy lived on, not in monuments but in the hearts and minds of ordinary people. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the fields in golden light, Harold stood silently, watching the children play. His cane rested lightly in his hand, a symbol of both his past and his present. Though his body bore the marks of countless battles, his spirit remained unbroken. He had fought wars, faced death, and endured loss, but none of that mattered now. What mattered was the future, the generations who would rise stronger because of the seeds he had planted, and as he turned to head inside, the faint sound of laughter trailing behind him, Harold allowed himself a rare moment of peace. The galaxy was vast, full of challenges yet unseen, but he knew it was in good hands. Years passed, and the legend of Harold grew even larger, though he himself remained a quiet figure in the background. The galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. Colonies once plagued by fear and chaos now thrived under the influence of the Vanguard legacy. People didn't rely solely on machines anymore. They trusted their own strength, their instincts, and each other. It wasn't a perfect world, but it was better, stronger, kinder. In the farming colony where Harold had settled, life moved at its own gentle pace. The fields stretched wide and green, kissed by the golden rays of the setting sun. Children ran barefoot through the dirt paths, laughing as they chased one another. Farmers worked together, sharing tools and stories, building lives rooted in simplicity and resilience. And Harold? He walked among them, unnoticed by most, yet deeply loved by those who knew him. Every morning, Harold would rise early, before the sun crested the horizon. He'd step outside his small cottage, cane in hand, and take a slow walk through the fields. The air was cool and crisp, carrying with it the earthy scent of soil and growing plants. Birds chirped softly in the distance, and the occasional breeze rustled the leaves of nearby trees. It was peaceful here, a stark contrast to the battles he had fought in his younger days. The children adored Harold, though they didn't fully understand who he was or what he had done. To them, he was simply the old man who told the best stories. They would gather around him during breaks from play, sitting cross-legged in the shade of an old oak tree. Harold would lean back against the trunk, his cane resting beside him, and begin spinning tales of faraway places and daring adventures. Once, he said one afternoon, his voice low and steady, there was a soldier who faced a machine so big it blocked out the sky. Everyone thought he couldn't win, but he didn't care about size or strength. He cared about doing what was right. What happened? One little girl asked, her eyes wide with wonder. Harold smiled faintly. He won, not because he was stronger than the machine, but because he believed in himself and in the people counting on him. The children